All right, everybody, let's do a webinar. And I'm going to, is everyone cool? Everyone's cool.
Mhm.
Welcome, everybody. We have begun. I'm Jose Garcia. I'm not moderating the event. I'm producing this for Ear Health and Sigrid. And I'm actually just here to kind of, just a little bit of housekeeping. This event is 1 hour long. And you may have seen that in your calendar or on LinkedIn. We're actually going to be here for 2 hours because when the webinar ends, there's going to be an after party. You don't have to go to a different place for the after party. There's no, just stay here and the after party will begin. And I'm just letting people in. I'm going to bring on Sigrid's actually, and this webinar. Sigrid's the moderator this event, and the architect. This all started when you sent me a message. I don't know if you remember that. It was a couple of months ago.
Do remember. I do remember. And I'm very happy that you were excited to take this on with me. Because the basics of this and the reason why I can like I think the background of me sending that message to you as well is from this becoming clearer and clearer is that a lot of innovation is taking place, a lot of innovation in healthcare. But And that's becoming more and more clear. You see numbers from like 70% to 95% of pilots don't make it to the clinics. And that's an issue. And what I've noticed as well is like, okay, you should involve stakeholders, and I really should involve stakeholders, but the stakeholders are busy. And so we want to involve stakeholders to understand what they really need, what the challenges are, how the workflows are, and to understand the frustrations. But if you can't involve those stakeholders, how can you know that you're developing something that is useful to healthcare? So I believe that having a type of co-collaborating, more openness to the challenges that are in healthcare can open up collaboration with health tech, med tech, to understand, okay, these are the challenges that are there. These are the pain points. Can we use our technology? Can we use our knowledge to support those challenges? Because if we don't have that communication, we're never going to get there. That's kind of a bit where it came from. And to have a discussion today with everyone. So everyone who's here, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for joining us. And if you have any questions, please just add it to the chat. Any comments, that way. Any comments, please let us know, because we do want to hear from you. We don't want to understand your experience. If you come from healthcare, if you come from health tech, your experience in this co-collaboration and understanding the pain points and sharing the pain points.
I say comment on what you just said. Do you mind? The one thing I noticed is I started working in oncology about 4 or 5 months ago, and I think I'm allowed to say this. The founder was thinking, "Oh, we've developed this product. It's just going to be community oncologists, just for this type of oncologist. We've designed it for that." And I said, "Oh, let's just talk to everybody." And she started talking to everybody, and then she realized, "Oh, there's academics, there's educators, there's researchers, and they're all like saying, oh, why can't this product be for us? But you need to add one feature so we can use it." And they're like, oh, I didn't know you wanted it. I didn't know you wanted it. And then that changes everything. But that only came from engaging with the community. If she was just like, okay, here's our list of people and we're only going to talk to them, then she would be in a very different place right now. And whereas like these people will come in sideways and say, oh no, we could use this in our field if you do that. And she only found that out by engaging with the whole community. And I see that like with lots of, but that's one of the reasons why when you came to me, I said, yes, let's do that. And that's more of a comment than a question. Do you mind if I ask you a question before I
For sure,
leave?
for sure.
And because I'm not staying, and what if you could tell us your why? Why do you, what's like, what does this mean to you? Because you've got like, you've got your own background, your own motivation, besides like what the field needs. Sigrid's why.
Mm,
Do you mind? Is that
yeah.
too mushy?
No, I don't know if I have a good reason for my why. I think it's because like well, first of all, I'm very um I am like on fire for innovations in healthcare. I've worked in healthcare myself, and I've seen how healthcare could improve. And but I also understand like healthcare is important. Like you can't not have healthcare, but how healthcare is today needs to change. And the only way we can change it, and the only way we can work better, the only way we can give the patient treatment who should get treatment, like and specify what type of treatment they should have. We need innovation for that. We also need innovation for healthcare professionals so that they can, work better, so that they will be less overworked. I come from a healthcare family. Mom was a nurse. I have a clinical nutrition background. So I used to work as a nutritionist in the hospital as well. But just knowing, like seeing friends, family who's worked in healthcare and how they're just overworked. My mom always used to say, if you work like 80% of a 100% work week, like 80% in a work week for a nurse is already 100%. You can't work 100% as a nurse because it's too much. And there's always like, that's so weird. Like, why can you not work 100%? But it's such a heavy job. And yeah, that's where kind of this like, of many reasons why I think innovation is important. But I want to see more successful innovations in healthcare. I want to see more healthcare professionals being enthusiastic about innovation and not just like, oh no, another system I need to learn, another thing I need to do, because it shouldn't stand in the way. It should work together. It should improve healthcare instead of being a frustration. So I think, yeah, it should help, like innovations should be there to improve quality, improve efficiency, improve quality of life of patients. And currently that's not the case.
Thank you. I'm going to leave now. It's
Thank you.
You're the boss now, Sigrid. I'm leaving. Here we go. And
Thanks, okay, Jose. Thanks. And thank you for being here for now. Jose is still not fully gone, everyone. He's in the background and keeping eyes out on the chat. But I want to welcome Joachim. Joachim, you are a doctor by training, but now you're not working as a doctor anymore. Can you just tell everyone about a little bit who you are and why you're here?
Sure. Thanks, Sigrid, for inviting, and Jose, obviously, and the partner speakers here today. As you say, Sigrid, I'm a medical doctor and used to work in the A&E department. And I think it was so funny when you said this around, or just ask you around the why, because when I went into this webinar, I was asking myself, what are really my sort of 3 key reflections around what differentiates being successful in this sector or not. It is really articulating the why very carefully. But I'll come back to that later. So I worked as a clinician. I realized a couple of, individuals, patients coming back all the time, and we started to do statistics on those high frequent visitors, or whatever you called it. And then that basically developed over time, first into clinical trials, and then actually a company which today is operating out of London and serving the NHS with still a clinical validation program, but also commercial contracts, and also live in Ireland. And we have the technology is basically a prediction platform using real-time electronic health record data, ingesting that data, normalizing it, testing it for fairness and equity, and then bringing an output, providing an output, which basically are predictable scores, but also explanatory pieces for those scores. For example, what's the risk of somebody getting admitted to hospital unplanned? That's the data science engineering piece, obviously packaged in a software platform. The other part is we have around 30 employed nurses working remotely, and being able to deliver quite a variety of services. Right now, it's primarily a clinical coaching program, which we then can allocate to individuals who are identified being at risk. So we are a little bit unusual in terms of being a sort of tech-enabled service, you could call it, with a strong digital muscle, but also a clinical muscle. And the reason for that is obviously want to take our technology through the entire way to answer the why. Why are we doing this? We are doing this because there are far too many patients end up in hospital, despite the fact that they wouldn't need to do that. So that's the why. And I'll finish off now by just doing the introduction and saying that currently we run together with the NHS. We are running one of the NHS largest real-world evidence trials to implement this technology large scale, 11,000 patients over 3 years. And we have come sort of 1/3 into that huge trial, and hope at a different time point to be able to tell you sort of early results and data. It's quite amazing when you start linking together data with an immediate action in the way we're doing this. So I'll stop there. Thanks, Sigrid, for inviting.
Thank you. And thanks for explaining what you're doing right now. But I'm curious, how did you, like you mentioned a bit, you saw, okay, you started doing research on this topic, but how did you, how was it for you? Because I think one of the things that I've seen in healthcare for myself, with other people who worked in healthcare is, but this is just how we do it. You know, like, why are you asking questions about this? This is how we do it. This is the standard way of working. What made you different in that way, that you actually ask questions about it? Like, hey, there's something here. Can you explain a bit around that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the reason I got into this field was starting to understand that the way we produce healthcare doesn't really take into account that we can monitor rising risks in a population. We sit there in the A&E, have all resources 24 hours, and wait until the patients crash in. But the reality is, with the data availability today and the AI, which has obviously become much more powerful, you can predict that 8, 9 out of 10 individuals who will crash into the A&E in the next half year. So why don't you do that and allocate the service to them? But that wasn't your question. I think many innovators who start medical digital companies will have an observation of something that doesn't work in the way they would like it to work, and then they sort of deconstruct that problem and try to build a business around it. What I think is important is, you know, if you go down that route, you get into different technology decisions, you get into business model decisions. And I think far too many forget about what was actually the why, right? The why for us is not AI. It's not the digital platform. It's not the coaching itself. The why is providing something that can prevent patients from, you know, getting unplanned admissions. And I think if you try to really keep that narrative, looking back at our development, I would say that 60-70% of what we deliver today is actually then co-developed with clients, rather than us defining that this is the product that they should have. And the simple fact is, I mean, data speak normally for themselves. They don't speak alone, but we chose the way to really early clinically validate what we were doing. So we have done 3 randomized controlled trials of a total of 15,000 patients. And now we're doing this 11,000. It's an academic study. So doing that and then putting it out in the public in a similar way as a pharma company would do their phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trial. And if you have that, you first of all, you understand if you really make a difference, or if your technology is a hoax. Secondly, you have very strong data to engage in a policymaker or provider discussion to convince them that there's actually a better way to, you know, there's a different way which might be more efficient to do what you're doing today.
Thank you. And so you mentioned something, because you saw something when you're working in hospital, and now you're co-developing with the clients. How do you go into new hospital settings, new care settings, and kind of also involve these different stakeholders and co-develop?
I think in the medical sector, people like data, they like evidence, they like a process to clinically validate the efficacy of what you're doing. And I mean, in our case, it's quite specific. So the Pareto always is that around 1% of a population in a developed healthcare system consumes 80% of unplanned care, right? And most people know that. but very few of them know that the turnover per annum is the annual turnover of those high users of bed days is around 80% per year. So our healthcare system is occupied by delivering resources to individuals who are very dynamic in their demand, right? That's not the way the system is set up. We are applying a slow mover system to a fast mover demand. And if you are able to engage with clinicians around those insights, because they're all day they're taking care of patients, and they don't maybe see this sort of, look at from a marketing or user perspective. I mean, you need a hook to be able to engage and do that on fact-based material.
Yeah. Thank you, Joachim. I will bring Morkos on, and we'll bring you back on later. But thank you so much for your insights. Morkos.
Hello.
Hey, we have discussed this topic often in detail, I think. This challenge that we see in understanding the real needs. Can you explain a bit, like, first who you are and why you're here today?
So my name is Morkos Iskander. I am a medical doctor also by background, much like Joachim as well. My journey that led to here is that I left full-time clinical care about 5.5, maybe 6 years ago, coming up to 6. And since then I've been working in industry in various roles and various capacities, increasing responsibility and things like that. I've been working as an external consultant with a lot of tech companies recently. Tech companies are facing a little bit of a challenge. One, when you go and learn about how to start your tech company and how to engineer it, it's all about agile development, rapid cycles, iterations, which doesn't really work in healthcare. And the UK, for example, has an average adoption time for a pilot of between 9 and 15 months, which, if you're going for that every time, it means that you just can't do the iterations like you want to. But when they develop ideas, and there are things that you can develop in workflow improvements, it helps the clinicians in theory. But those things, like when we talked about in the past, they're not accepted. They don't quite fit. They're not right in terms of what the marketplace wants, what the healthcare staff wants. This is because I think half the companies in technology at the moment study healthcare from an overview rather than lived experience point. They then come up with nice engineering solutions that work on paper, but not really in practice. So the old adage of, in theory and practice are the same, in practice they're not. And then it kind of falls apart at that point. In the little chat that we were having before we started the webinar, I actually relayed something that I've been looking into. So I've spoken to a fair number of companies, but I've also gone out and spoken to people who this stuff is being sold to. So all the healthcare staff, all the managers, all the doctors, the nurses, and a lot of the stuff, a lot of the advice that the companies are getting is from people who have the degree, but perhaps also lack the intrinsic lived experience. So when they're giving their advice, their opinions, it's perhaps not a complete picture. It's kind of a surface level knowledge. That comes across as, I've got the medical advisor, I've got someone who's giving me a frontline opinion, but perhaps it's not the whole opinion. And that kind of also leads to a pilot that starts, clinicians then abandon it. I spoke to one person who said that he's been, his words, forced to adopt 3 different bits of tech in the last 6 months, and he's not used any of them for more than 2 weeks because after a while it becomes something that gets in the way and he doesn't see any added value apart from one thing. Like you said in your introduction, there isn't really the capacity for just do this one little thing more, because there is no time for that one little thing more. Everyone's already rushed around. If if you could do with another 20% increase in your time already just to cope with what you're doing, what seems like a small addition isn't really that small because it is the straw that breaks the camel's back. I think there needs to be a little bit of a reset of development has to be with the end user already, not just in mind, but like was said earlier, co-creating it from the beginning.
Mm.
If that isn't always possible, and obviously at the early stages it isn't really, then the advice, the opinions that are being sought should be from people who can give meaningful advice that guides development. I've been there, I've got the medical degree, but honestly, the stuff that you know about taking the responsibility, about being the person in charge, about being the person when people ask you the complicated and the difficult questions, when you're making a decision between, two bad options and where to go with that, that's not something that is necessarily in a textbook. It's also not something that unique to healthcare. I mean, the average amount of information available for a critical decision for a CEO is usually 15% of what ends up in the business case review in the end when you sit there and you're at the business school and you're analyzing it and you're going through, it's like, what would you do in that case? And it's not the ideal situation. And that's the difference between the advice that would work in the idealized setting and the advice that would work in the real world. And until solutions are developed for the real world, it's not a solution that's going to stick. But there's a lot of hope. There's so much that could be improved with innovation. There's so much in terms of tech that could be brought in and updated, a lot of stuff that would make things better today with minimal effort. But it's not necessarily the stuff that's being developed.
So, could you mention, like, talk a little bit about, because you mentioned something. Okay, they have engaged with some stakeholders, but that they still don't understand the challenge because they might not have engaged, I don't know, with the right stakeholder, or that one stakeholder might not have understood the whole challenge. Can you, from your opinion, mention a bit? Okay, so who should one engage with, and how many? Can you also overdo it?
Okay, who to talk to? I'd definitely try and get the opinions of people who you anticipate will eventually use your product. So one of the companies is working in radiology, for example. I would definitely get the people who are going to be working in the radiology department. That does mean go and talk to the radiographers. That does mean go and talk to the radiologists. Go and talk to the manager who has to actually schedule everything in there. It would be extremely useful to have a day where you get nice permission and actually just go and be a fly on the wall and see how the department works. And you'll often see so much that you couldn't really get from just one single conversation. In terms of how many to talk to, so there's a technique in qualitative research where when you start analyzing things, you stop at the point of saturation, where it means that you've done a few, and that few number does vary depending on which expert and which PhD you talk to. But it's when you start getting, I've spent another 3-4 hours, I've generated absolutely no new information, and everything is just reinforcing what was already said. At that point, you probably have enough to make a working start. The problem is that's not the most exciting way for anyone who's trying to develop something brand new and groundbreaking to spend the day. But until that happens, it's very difficult to then gauge what's going on. There's a funny story that someone sent me of a screenshot of a founder who says, like, I'm working with my engineering team. They've got this excellent product that honestly, they can't think of any way to improve it. The only problem is no doctor or nurse ever wants to use it because they just see it as completely and totally unnecessary and extra. And I just think a technically excellent product that doesn't help people isn't actually all that great. It's a nice engineering exercise, but that's the difference between in academia where you're researching because you want to do something to solve the puzzle, and an industry where you're solving a very specific puzzle because you want to reach a practical and very pragmatic solution.
Mm.
So there isn't a set number, I'm afraid, but there are techniques, and people have written loads of stuff on how to do a good qualitative study to make sure you've reached the saturation point. I can help people reach that bit, but it has to be a solution that's tailored to that individual case and that individual question. But that's really what you want, because the whole point of an innovation is to get it as good as possible. If having an MVP means it has to be a viable product, not just minimum. I think for healthcare in particular, an MVP can be quite a complicated and very well developed and high efficacy thing where people are willing to tolerate, your Fitbit perhaps not working quite as good as the Garmin, and it's okay. It's fine.
I do have a comment on that, like what you mentioned earlier. Okay, you want to have a tool that's fit or that's tailored for a specific workflow. But what if you don't even know that workflow yet? You want to understand. You might come in blind with no idea in mind. You just know, okay, healthcare is struggling. We know that. But in what? How do you engage with clinicians before they even know there is a tailored tool?
So that's where an experienced medical advisor can come in handy. Part of the reason that I can do what I do is I have the right letters after my name, and I can write from a nice university address, and I can do from this and that, and it tends to not automatically go into junk mail. If you're just asking, can you give up some of your already oversubscribed and precious time for something that's going to benefit me and my company, and I'm doing it for purely commercial reasons, it's perhaps not a great move. A good idea is to say, I want to get your opinion on what you see a problem is, and don't offer a solution. Let them actually vent and talk. My big problem is that even though everybody's rushed, they often speak for upwards of 90 minutes at a time, and you're trying to find out actually what the problems are. And once they start talking, once they realize that things can be different, it's almost like the scales fall from their eyes. They realize it could be done differently, and they start telling you exactly what they want, what would be bought up instantly the second that it's on the marketplace. But if you're saying, I'm already developed something, I want to get your opinion on it, that's a little bit it's a little bit presumptuous, and it's a little bit self-centered, really. And for a lot of healthcare staff, everyone is trained to be extra nice and extra polite. So they're not going to be rude or dismissive. They might just mean not replying to your stuff. And that's often where people reach out and say, I can't get hold of anyone to make any connections or any calls. But it's very possible to get hold of the right people and get the right input.
With the right question.
Sorry?
And
with the right
with the right question and right.
Well, with the right question, but it has to start from the point of being very open to them saying to you, it's like, no, this idea, it wouldn't work, and here is why. And it's certain, I would say that that's a great investment, because if they tell you the idea isn't wonderful from the get-go, pivoting at the start is much cheaper and much more effective than pivoting after 3-4 years. And people forget average startup has about 6 pivots before they land on something brand new that works. It's very different to say yet another ambient scribe, and that's been done, and you're following a very well-worn path. But if you're inventing something from scratch, generally speaking, it's about 6 different root things that are tried before you find something that sticks.
Thank you, Morkos. It's interesting hearing from your insights as well, how like you've gone through and how the insights you can get from the hospital staff, but also in this busy time, and how, you know, it's all about understanding them and having the focus on them and not yourself. So I want to thank you so much, and then I want to bring on Paul, who's also here with us. There, thank you, Jose. Paul, you have also some insights, I believe, in some AI and innovation developments, but also how you can bring that to the clinics. But first, I want you to introduce yourself and then comment a bit on the others, what they've said.
Sure. Hi. So I'm the CEO and founder of Sacher AI. We're a multidisciplinary behavioral AI consultancy and health tech product lab. Bit of a mouthful, but that sort of describes what we do, both the consultancy and kind of developing our own internal products around clinical and behavioral AI safety. In terms of my background, I'm a digital health clinician and a behavioral AI scientist. I have previously worked in the UK NHS and academia for over 11 years. And I'm currently also a collaborator with Imperial College London's Health Impact Lab. And really what the Health Impact Lab is focusing on is moving from research, from RCTs to actual implementation at scale across the NHS to deliver impact. So there's a huge amount of learnings that come from taking, you know, interventions that have been proven to be efficacious in RCTs, and then basically convincing people on the ground to implement them and figuring out all the, you know, the details of how that actually works. The team at Imperial has done some great work using called a tricorder. It's basically the largest implementation of AI in the NHS, and it's an artificially driven stethoscope designed to be able to predict patients at risk of having cardiovascular disease or actual like acute like heart attacks, for example, before, you know, GPs are actually able to pick it up using sort of more traditional methods. So doing some really great work. And also many of the health tech companies that Sacher AI works with are supporting and delivering healthcare services, supporting many patients delivering healthcare services at scale. And in my view, there are more and more of these growing sort of digital health tech companies. In my view, they are healthcare organizations in their own right. They're working with patients. They're facing the same regulatory and safety expectations that, you know, larger healthcare systems like the NHS face. And in some cases, you know, more and more, I think their tools are increasingly being integrated into public healthcare systems. So although, you know, the work I'm doing is sort of almost one step upstream, we're still helping to shape the systems that ultimately need to work in real clinical settings. So I think there's a lot that traditional healthcare can learn from these teams, particularly around speed, behavioral insight, experimentation is one that I see a lot of within health tech that I don't see in sort of what I call legacy healthcare systems like the NHS, but also things like user-centered design. So at Sacher AI, we do two main things. We advise sort of health tech and life science companies. We help them shape their AI strategy and their roadmaps. And that often means, you know, helping them to identify the most feasible and most impactful and safe areas for AI adoption across their teams. And then we also build bespoke AI systems, which are both patient-facing and internal team tools. So I think it's great that we have on one hand like the strategic lens, and on the other hand, we're actually pragmatic and we're actually going from sort of strategy to implementation. And I think one key thing to mention is that our work is really grounded in deep discovery and workflow analysis. And it often includes, you know, really doing some quite solid sort of stress testing of prototypes in our own evaluation lab. So yeah, that's in a nutshell what we do.
Thank you. And so you've heard what the others, like what Joachim and Morkos mentioned about getting your product or innovation to the clinics and how you can involve clinicians to figure out what the problem is. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I think we've had some great insights today. I really appreciated how practical the conversations have been, not just sort of theoretical. But from my perspective, a big part of the work is really helping organizations to figure out where AI can actually make a difference. And that might be across clinical, operational, even like product teams. But before, we start building anything, we need to really spend time deeply understanding the realities of these organizations. And, in my experience, that starts, and I think this has been mentioned, with really detailed discovery. So going step by step through workflows, meeting key members of the team, getting access to systems, or even like screenshots of the clinician or patient experience. And just as important, probably one of the most important things is getting access to actual data, because we often hear really strong opinions, and often the loudest voice is the one that's driving sort of insight-driven decisions in the organization, but they're not always backed by current or even like complete data. So we actually dig into the data ourselves, we analyze it independently, and we make sure that we're grounding our decisions in what's actually happening, not just the sort of the assumptions that we're hearing. And then, we really need, we then generally sort of need to look deep at how the organizations are actually working. So, what is the typical path, in other implementations where things have moved from ideas to pilots to practice? Like, who's been involved in those? Who were the decision makers? What's worked before? And very importantly, like, why? I think Marcus was saying some of this as well. And really making it clear that we're not there to impose a process, but we're there to kind of build on what's already working, and trying to use methods and language that the team's comfortable with. And then once we've got that foundation, we start building and testing. So sometimes we advise, sometimes we take early concepts off the busy team's plate, because I think capacity is one of the things I wanted to comment on. I think, we can all have like the best ideas in the world, but if the internal teams or organizations have just no capacity, there's no space for people to actually take the time to really think through some of the things that maybe like an external body could do and like a company like ours can do. It's very hard to actually help people practically make changes to their workflows and their practices. So, having organizations that can do the research for them, that can build and test prototypes, that can really stress test the prototypes, and then sort of take back to them sort of the results of that. Like, this is a valid concept, we recommend you implement it, and this is how we suggest you do it, and we can help you with additional resources. But ultimately, a lot of that comes down to like the strategic side of things, whether the work has actually been prioritized at a strategic level. I know a lot of companies are interested in AI, but often you'll find there's no guidelines in the organization. People don't understand like how they, whether they should be using AI, and if they are, how they should be using it. They're worried about like patient data. And so it really needs to come from like a top down. So where teams are given the capacity, the resource, and it's prioritized that they are able to start working on some of these ideas. But then also like bottom up, a lot of people don't feel confident with AI. They don't have training in AI. And so it's kind of like a top down, bottom up approach. And I think when you get those pieces together with some experts kind of injected into the mix, I think that's when you often see like really good results and things moving beyond prototypes or even pilots.
So there's a comment here from one of the audience, Linda, and she says where she like in her region, I do assume now that Linda comes from a healthcare organization, that they might have these systems that, okay, that's great that I can do this, but we don't have money or resources. How would you approach that? Because it also is a part of this understanding what healthcare is going through and understanding the possibilities there, and not just from the development point of view, but really understanding and involving the clinicians and the people working in the healthcare systems.
Yeah, and that sort of leads on from what I was saying. I think there's no shortage of kind of interest and enthusiasm, like on the ground. People you know, why wouldn't you want to consider a new technology if it's going to make your job easier, lead to better outcomes, better safety, etc. And I think more and more clinicians, healthcare professionals on the ground are aware of the potential benefits, but then there's also the concerns around potential risks as well, particularly in healthcare. We have to be really careful about putting AI in front of patients without doing a lot of testing and validation and going through all the regulatory hoops. So that's why I think it's kind of, again, like top down, bottom up. So if there's a groundswell of people interested in AI who actually want to make a change, we have capacity to think about that. And then at the same time, senior leaders in the organization are acknowledging that and basically supporting teams either to sort of think, you know, start to think about some of these, the areas where AI could make a big difference, and then bringing in experts to work with them, or building out the internal resource to be able to do that work. But without that sort of top down, it's very hard for people, healthcare professionals working the ground, to actually implement things. And often they land up using some of these tools almost for like personal purposes, but that's almost like, you know, in the background, and no one really is acknowledging that. I mean, one of the things we suggest often is doing like an AI readiness assessment, just getting like a baseline measure of how people feel about AI, and also like what type of sort of AI is being used in the organization, and keeping it anonymous so people really do share, and then taking that back to senior leadership and basically saying like, did you realize 75% of your staff are already using AI, but there's no guidelines, there's no training, there's no support, and obviously there could be potentially like issues with kind of data breaches. So let's do this in a much more sort of coherent, planned, organized way, as you would do with any other sort of new process or change management initiative within the organization.
Yeah. So say, I do agree, like we need to have literacy and we need to understand why we're using AI. And there's so many tools that are off the shelf that we can just use now. Everyone can log in, everyone has an AI tool either on the phone and on the laptop. But say that the clinician, so you have a whole department, they already, okay, we see it has a workflow fit, like the tool, AI tool has a workflow fit, it's clinically validated, it has great patient outcomes, it's minimal disruptive, it's compliant, etc., etc. But and they kind of try to push this forward, but then the management say, no, but we don't have money. How do you approach that, the resource question?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult. I think, you know, we work generally with like senior leaders, senior leadership teams, because I think if you don't have the buy-in from the top down, I think it's very difficult, you know, for individuals working on day-to-day sort of clinical roles at capacity to really try and make these changes. So I think, yeah, there doesn't, from my perspective, there doesn't seem to be a lack of desire from people working in very sort of busy clinical roles, but in a way they're sort of powerless to actually implement any of these things unless they get buy-in from above. And so I think some of the organizations that are leading the way, it's where you get buy-in, you know, from above first, and then everything kind of follows, you know, without budget, without prioritization, without the, you know, the expertise to do this work. It's pretty much impossible for people working, you know, individually or even in small teams to sort of make any significant changes. And as I said, there's always the risk that something goes wrong because people don't truly understand, you know, the pros and cons, or what these AI models are able to do safely or not. So
I wonder if I can add something to the money.
I wanted to bring everyone on again, so then you can add something. So Jose, can you bring everyone on? Also Joachim. Thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to address this money and budget question, because that's really at the core of things. Especially if you're offering something new, you're gonna send a bill to it, right, along with the innovation, right? That's the whole point of the business. Except that's really just economics at its core. Economics is the allocation of scarce resources to where they are most wanted. That's how the entire market is. So if you're talking to people and the answers that you get are there's no budget, you're either talking about something that they don't actually want, that they don't actually need, or it's not their top priority at the moment, or you're talking to the wrong person who isn't in charge of the budget. So when you are talking to certain people, when you have got your spokesperson, whether that's your medical advisor, your head of sales, your CEO going in, they need to be able to draw into the decision makers, like was just said by Paul. But that person needs to have a bird's eye view of where the money's being spent. The reality of it is there will never, ever be infinite money for all innovations, no matter which healthcare system you go for. The idea of an innovation is that you're doing something better. So I'm going to give another business school stuff because I've been asked to rewrite a curriculum for the MBA. So there you go. The story is, if Henry Ford did a survey of all the people saying, what would you guys want? No one would say a car. They'd say, I want a faster horse. So they already told you they want faster transportation. Your job then is to make sure that their expectation and your product and their priority and what you've got to deliver, all of them align. The problem that we've got at the moment is that there's a lot of innovations around, but it's either demanding more time or saying if you add extra spending, there will be an improvement in healthcare, except that there is no extra money to be spent. So the challenge is going to be, if you're delivering a way of new pathways, new flows, new ways of doing things, it has to deliver a better outcome faster and at a lower unit cost. Because at the moment, there is no economy in Western Europe or North America or Australasia that can afford the current level of healthcare in the next 15 years for its population. So without any innovations, without buying anything new, the healthcare systems are set to exceed GDP within the next 15 years. There is no more money to do it. And if you're asking people to spend more, your answer is going to be no from the get-go. But if you're saying, with this tool, instead of this, you can achieve better healthcare outcomes at lower cost, then that's the way to do it. Something that's not particularly techy, GLP-1s, for example, the way that they've been done, the way that they have been marketed, and the way they're taking off is that they are saying, what we will do is by reducing the poorly controlled diabetics control of the diabetes, reducing the weight, improving cardiovascular risks, we can actually reduce the overall cost of care. So yes, you're paying more for this bit, but as a whole healthcare system, you're actually paying less. The reality of there's so many innovation companies at the moment, and if every single one of them gets funded, the healthcare system in any country would go bankrupt within 12 months. So if the answer is there's no money to do this, it means that that is not a priority. It's also adding to everything bad and not adding enough good. And part of the good has to be reducing the cost. And if that can't be done, then the product isn't ready. That's the harsh reality.
Thank you. So for you others, then I will bring Joachim on first. What do you think success looks like? Successful innovations or successful tools in the clinics?
Thanks, Sigrid. A broad question, and I think the way I look at it more and more is, okay, you create something because you have a strong affinity to the why, solving a problem, and then you do it in a certain way. That's the how. To answer your question, I think around what you do, I think you need to think of the customer experience in all different dimensions. So if I put a product out there or a service or whatever it is, I will have a couple of different customer segments or users and clients, but I call them customers, all of them. So how will the patient appreciate, or what will the patient's experience be of my product or my service? What will the clinician's experience be? What will the commissioner's experience be? What will the policymakers' experience be of my product or my company? If you ask yourself that all the time, if you know that your product actually works and it delivers all that we have concluded that they need to do in order to be viable, then really focus on the customer experience in the broad sense. Because sometimes we forget we have a lovely product for a patient, and we do a trial, it delivers fantastic results, and we believe, let's roll it out because we've demonstrated all our endpoints. But if you haven't even thought of who are the different customer segments here, the economical buyer, the clinical buyer, the patient, the competitors even, right? You could call them in a broad sense, customers. All of them need to, in one or the other way, or try to optimize your offer and your product to actually interest them and make the customer experience a good experience for them. That, I think, is a quite good guiding principle that completely disregards your initial product or the why, but focus on, what will the experience be of being exposed to, for example, our company or our service from many different perspectives. It's quite good exercise to actually try to do that, right? Because you often find that you have a limited understanding of some customers' experience and what they actually think and how they will be confronted with your product.
Interesting. I heard once that you can have, like, you should go to the customer of your customer. So in healthcare, that would be the patient. And I think like following that flow, and especially for what you guys do, Joachim, okay, you try to like figure out who has a high risk of going into emergency rooms. Okay, what's happening with them? Because actually it's not that interesting what's happening in the hospital. It's actually interesting what's happening to that patient.
Yeah.
So the customer of the customer. And Paul, do you have any comments on what makes it successful, this collaboration?
Well, one of the reasons I left the NHS is because there was no shortage of great ideas. I had some great ideas and I landed up doing a spin out. But, I'm very fortunate that I'm not in a position where I only work on things that have funding behind them, as is the nature of the business we're in. But I think something that I wanted to sort of add to the conversation is that you really can't build effective AI for healthcare unless you start with, how people actually think and behave. So obviously, as a behavioral scientist by background, to me, that means really understanding. I think we've covered real workflows, but also under identifying sort of the underlying behavioral needs and barriers. So that could be needs of patients, needs of the internal team, clinicians, needs of, senior leadership, but also importantly, like what the barriers are. And I think, Morkos, you touched on quite a few of them. And then I think, what needs to happen next is to actually start mapping the actual systems people use. I think that's what we've just been discussing around the patient experience or the team experience. And often I think what you find is that when you do that, it's a lot messier than you expected. There's a lot of workarounds and band-aids, legacy systems, etc. But if you do all that, if you combine the behavioral insights with workflow data and the organizational context, then I think if you get all those pieces sort of aligned, then companies or organizations are able to move beyond pilots, to, embed solutions, optimize workflows. And ultimately, I think if you can link it to improved outcomes, and some of those can be financial outcomes, KPIs, revenue targets, even if you're spending more money initially, it's very hard to implement some of these things unless there is a budget. So yeah, I think that's just something I wanted to add at the end here.
Thank you. We have a question from the Q&A. So from Melissa, more collaboration and reflection on the discussion. She says, innovation should be HO to H2. I do think it's something with the fund, how much a patient is funded, but I not 100% sure. And the H0 to H1 are about the process improvements of tasks and process to free up resources currently in administration to help with the triple aim. That creates the ROI to pay for innovation. Otherwise, we are doubling up on the physician workflows to do what? Make them do the admin? Any comments on that? Nope.
It's
Morkos, you have something.
it's a valid point. It's there's been a lot of the big push that's come out from the US in particular, that a lot of the AI summarization tools and billing tools have resulted in a lot of pushback. So the physicians there have been accused of aggressive billing simply because it turns out that the doctors were so rushed for time they weren't even billing for all the stuff they're doing. Whereas the AI isn't getting tired. It knows how to follow the rules. It will spend all the time to fill every box on every application. The problem is a lot of, say, the ambient scribes, for example, the ones that have taken off the most in the recent past in terms of healthcare AI, they have resulted in the doctors actually having to do their kind of normal clinical work. Then they have to double check the notes because there's at least one case that's going through the courts at the moment about a very long, detailed consultation where the doctor relied on the scribe and didn't take independent notes because what would be the point? The scribe made a mistake or hallucination or documented things slightly differently. Obviously, they're limited in what they can release, but then the patient had a problem afterwards because of this discrepancy. And the doctor says, like, yeah, that is a discrepancy. That's not what happened. That's not actually my memory of it. But there's an element of, if we're saying an innovation, even like the scribes, something that just basically listens to what you're saying and writes it down, can end up having this level of problems, asking the doctors to then do their own admin anyway, and as well as having a new technology added in, there's not really been a huge step forward there. So I get that bit, but I think that comes out of the alignment between what the innovation delivers and what it actually is intended to do. If you're talking about adding more workflow to the clinicians, it's not gonna, I can tell you now that there'll be very little appetite to take that forward simply because there's no time for any of that to be done on top of everything else.
Yeah, thank you. So we are rounding up. Thank you so much for all of you been here, everyone's listening. We are going to have an after party afterwards. But first, I want everyone to just say very short one sentence, and I'll keep it to one sentence each. Just a final word or call to action. Joachim, you may start.
Start with really articulating and being clear around the why. Optimize the how, and then think of customer experience, whatever you do, whoever you meet.
Thank you. Great one. And Paul?
Well, it's been a great discussion. I've learned a lot. It's amazing what happens when you put people in a virtual room who have the same focus, but with very different backgrounds and perspectives. I think my sort of takeaway would be like, try and approach these things with a behavioral lens as much as possible, because ultimately we're dealing with humans. There's lots of decisions being made, and understanding, what people are thinking and also why they're thinking that can actually lead to a lot of very valuable insights to inform, whatever it is that people are focusing on. So reach out to your nearest behavioral scientist if you have one on the team.
Thank you. And Morkos?
I'm willing to give up my slot to you as someone who's listened to all of us talk. So go on, Sigrid, you give us the summary.
Well, I liked actually one thing that you said very much is adding value. And I think that's what it is. And it also connects a bit to what Joachim was talking about, adding value to the patient or the whole clinical flow. So that was from me. Thank you so much, everyone. Joachim, I know you need to go, so I just wanted to say thank you so much for being here with us. And to everyone who's still here, feel free to hang on. We'll continue the discussion for a while until there's no more questions or until the time stops us.
Take care, Joachim. Thanks for coming.
Take care. Thanks.
Thank you.
So apologies, I'm going to have to leave as well.
Take care, Paul.
Thank you, Paul, for being
We
here.
have some people from the audience coming on camera. And by the way, you might as well if I say something. This is the response to something. It's not a counterpoint. Just to expand something Morkos said about engaging with people. I think he even said encouraging them to complain and not trying to sell to them. Here's the thing. If you try to sell to people, feedback shuts down. But also, and this is something people don't realize sometimes, is they will tell everybody what they're doing. They'll tell everybody about the product. They'll tell everybody about their ambitions. They'll tell everybody about their company. The other person hears that and knows it's so important. Now, they're going to be guarded what they say. Nobody wants to shoot down. Nobody wants to shoot your balloon down. One thing I've been doing this recently in oncology, is I've been interviewing people, oncologists. I've got an interest in precision oncology. They don't know who I work for. They don't know what we do. I don't tell them. I encourage them to complain, and they're happy to do that. And I've got hours of this stuff. It's too much for everybody in the company. But I've got 3 clips, which I've edited out, and I've gone to everybody in the company and say, okay, there's 3 clips, are about 1 to 2 minutes each. Everybody needs to watch this because everyone's saying this. And then that's gold. But if I wouldn't have that, if I told them, it's not just about not selling your product, it's not telling them you have one or the specifics, because then people become guarded. Everybody wants to be nice to you. Everybody wants
really,
to.
but it's what you say. It's really about them having to share their experience and not you or whoever like pushing something down the throat.
But it's the basics of actually when you talk to people who sell for a living, that's what they do. It's tell me exactly what problem you want to go away, because if we can make this thing make your problem go away, everybody's now motivated to make it happen. But if you want to finish at 3 and I'm going to sell you something that guarantees you always finish at 6, there's no meeting in the middle. It's not. There's a book actually by someone called Oren Clef. So he worked for quite an interesting hedge fund out in California that no one has ever heard of, and even he says no one's ever heard of this fund. But he's written a book called Pitch Anything. It's very much for the financial markets, but his techniques are quite simple, and it's actually let people tell you what they want. Don't try and put words in their mouth, and then that way they can easily do your work for them, and you get to be the nice guy that solved everyone's problems rather than the person who came in and wouldn't stop selling.
I think it's also, and I spoke to a startup founder on Tuesday, and he finds it so difficult because he started it with his sister. They've got this company. They're very passionate, and they have such a hard time getting feedback. Once people know about how passionate they are about the company, it's actually really difficult to get honest feedback. You have to really do a lot of work in the relationship before they're willing to open up. So it's almost better to like that. That's one thing. Obviously, sales is a little bit different. But the reason why I brought that up, Morkos, is you're talking about getting feedback from people about your problem space. And founders don't get it. A lot of founders don't get it because they don't realize they put out this vibe of this is my baby. And nobody wants to tell you your baby's ugly.
Well, that doesn't make very many friends, no.
Nobody wants to tell you your baby's ugly.
But that's it. I think that's where getting someone else to collect the feedback can be very, very useful. When you have to be that enthusiastic because it isn't all roses starting something from scratch. It is a lot of hard work, it's a lot of effort, but actually getting honest feedback is what helps you fix the problems and move on and make it much, much better, which is really what we all want, to use your analogy, for our kids, for them to carry on improving. So that's what I'd advise. If that's something that you just can't hide how excited you are, perhaps get somebody else to sit in the room and do some of the talking for you.
Does anybody in the audience want to speak on microphone or camera today and share their experiences with the panel? And just put your hand up or leave a comment. You don't have, okay. I'm going to, oh, I'm trying to find you, Dina. There you are. Do you want to speak? You want camera or microphone?
I think microphone is sufficient.
Yeah. Okay, you're allowed, I put you on mic. Oh, hold on a second.
Hi, how are you?
There you are. Yes.
Hi, great to join. Thank you.
Can you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Dina Yankelowitz, and I had an AI incubator that has built 4 healthcare AI product lines and brought them to the market over the past 6 years. Prior to that, I have a doctoral degree in education and 15 years of serious data experience.
And did you have a question or a comment for the panel?
Sure. First of all, just some feedback. I thought today's webinar was super informative and resonated so much with the actual front lines of bringing healthcare tech, really into the front lines and getting people to use it. I thought that everything was so spot on. I think what was really so important, Morkos, you spoke a lot about this, of making sure that not just the clinicians appreciate the software, but also the administration on the financial and operational side. So I feel like really what's sort of come out of this whole talk is the importance of hitting really 4 pieces, which is the financial efficiency, the operational efficiency, the clinical efficiency and accuracy, but most importantly, the patient care. And sort of taking existing workflows, filling gaps, but meeting all 4 of those pieces is really what will make our users actually adopt and implement. Another piece I thought was really interesting is the piece about, how do you differentiate between having a great idea that nobody will use and an AI idea that people will actually use? I think there are a few pieces. There's the AI being applicable, it being trustworthy and being useful. But I thought the piece that you guys spoke about a lot about that, testing with the real users encourages startup founders to do more iterative development and testing and not assume that their first solution is going to be it. That 6 pivot suggestion that you gave, I think that the more people embrace that from the start and begin that pivot quickly with actual usage can completely transform the success of an AI startup. And then the other piece that I was thinking about, and I think is so important, and I'm curious about the panelists' take on it as well as you guys, is, one of the focuses we've had is aiding but not replacing clinical decisions, doing it in a safe way so that our clinicians feel safe and don't feel overrun and misrepresented. And I feel like if AI can only fill that role instead of completely replacing clinical decisions, it's just so much faster and easier to implement.
So
That,
I-
that's a,
can I comment that a bit?
oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. It reminds me of a story I heard of a big medical device company, and they were developing an AI tool for they were diagnosing like some mental illness or some I guess it was dementia, Alzheimer's. I'm not 100% sure. Anyway, so they had a writing board, and depending on how that patient would write the X, like would have the one line over the other, it would diagnose that patient. So instead of a patient having to wait like 3 months, I think it was 3 months before we get a diagnosis, because we can't have to wait to be able to talk to the psychiatrist, and then they would have to get the diagnosis. And that would take so much time, while AI could do it in 2 minutes. The tool worked, the tool was clinically good, but the doctors didn't want that, because suddenly you take away the jobs, And I think that's exactly like what you mentioned as well. It's like, how can you make sure that the clinicians trust the tools, but also at the same time are not afraid of becoming like that they're still working there? And I think we need to have those conversations and have the conversations with the clinicians. Okay, so what do you feel about AI? How do you feel about like what type of feelings does it bring up with you? Are you afraid of your job? Yes or no? And how would that impact your job? Because the fact that we will be using more and more AI, it's going to happen. But we also want clinicians to be on board, one, to trust the tools, but also to still feel like that they feel valuable, that they are important in the whole healthcare system, because AI cannot do everything yet, and it will not be able to do everything either in the future. It will be able to do quite a lot of tasks, but not all the tasks. So how can you have to have that conversation and figure out, okay, maybe one of your tasks are going to be taken away. What else can you do? Because these, like, looking at the drawing boards are not what you're going to do. It's not what you do every day, like every hour of the day, every week of every day of the week.
Yeah, and I think a really important piece, and I don't know if I'm overstepping my time here, is the education of the end user. And that also is an iterative development process of how can we educate our users so that they use it properly. And sometimes, with our end of life predictor for hospices, which is so important for improving patient care, helping them understand how to use such predictive models in a safe way makes them feel more comfortable about it. So the more touch points there are with those end users in the education capacity, and given my background in education, I think that's a big focus of whatever we implement, is how do we help people who use these products understand them? And the more they understand them, the more likely they are to use them correctly.
I love that point.
Well, I heard a comment. I had one of these interviews where people complain. It was a clinical informaticist and oncologist at Northwell Health. I think I've actually put it on Talk Coded. He said he felt insulted. He said oncologists felt insulted because at every step of their workflow now, they're getting a black box LLM recommendation of how to treat their patient. And these are often wrong, but also require massive amounts of investigation to verify if they're right or wrong.
Right.
And so it's almost like, oh, this could be right, but it's might not be right, but it's going to take me an hour to find out.
Yeah.
And they're constantly being spammed by this, and they hate it. They actually hate it. And so I'll stop there, but I'm just passing that on. Somebody raised their hand.
I wonder if I can just comment on.
Go ahead.
Because this is the problem, especially with Gen AI in healthcare. There's a lot of feedback in that it does give you answers, and it gives you answers quickly, but they will probably the wrong answers more often than not. And that's kind of the bit of the art of medicine rather than not. I think Gen AI in medicine is probably a little bit far away. However, at the moment, healthcare is drowning in points of data everywhere, more than the average person can process, more than, professors of medicine can process on the fly. That's really something that AI can happily even just sort out the data. This is immediately important and requires action. This is less important and could wait before you look at it. And this is probably just red herrings being chucked in. That's not too dissimilar from how healthcare works at the moment. So the international standard of, ATLS, how we all manage trauma, and this is the same worldwide, it's basically an AI rubric, but just for humans. And that's how you go through it step by step. And it's allowing you to filter through it, go through the information, figure out what is immediately problematic and what is something that can wait.
But
I think
having such a tool though would require MDR, and I think that's stopping a lot of people because you would impact the clinical decision. It's one thing. Okay, do I need to make a call to I don't know, give my cat food? But that's not like. But the moment you impact, okay, should I see that patient? Yes or no? You have this like traffic light kind of system, or like kind of you rate it. Then you are impacting clinical decision. I like the idea. I agree we should have something like this where Gen AI could support, but I also see that it's going to be a bottleneck for organizations like, no, I'm not doing MDR. The moment I speak to people and like, hey, I have this I might have this innovative idea, or like I'm working on this like blah, blah blah, I would like to do something, and they're like, if you ever innovate, if you ever go into like that space, avoid MDR, avoid regulation. Like that's the advice you get.
I think
and if everyone does that, we're not going to go anywhere.
a lot of that about, if I'm honest, and there's a lot of people that are backing away from innovation simply because the way that the current set of regulations have been written, it's a little bit of a maze and a minefield, and all it takes is one misstep, and it all seems to blow up. What I've also found is across Western Europe, the EU's tried to homogenize it, but if you say compare EU, UK, North America, Australia, and the Middle East, everyone has a completely different timescale. Sometimes Japan actually has the longest timescales compared to anything. And that one was a statistic that caught me a little bit by surprise. It's not an area of the world where you often think is mired in red tape and is lacking in innovation, but they had the longest by about 25% compared to their next competitor. Now, if everybody's judging the same tech, making the same sort of decisions, how is it logically that some stuff can be done in 4 weeks in some places and in 17 months on average in another? That's either someone is doing overkill or someone is being sloppy, and it's up to people to just look through and see what happens. But I think regulation is a double-edged sword. It went from the Wild West to probably a bit of overkill, and I think it's going to be, either overtaken or overshadowed. Where innovation is just going to go, where regulation is going to let it happen. And if we rule it out from happening at home, we're going to be paying sky high prices for importing a developed technology. It costs more to import a Ferrari than to get a car made down the road from here.
Sometimes it works the other way, Morkos. I know in oncology, Spain goes last in Europe. Spain goes last, and they pay the lowest price. So they do the trade-off. They don't get the new cancer drugs. They're one of the last countries in Europe to get the new cancer drugs, but they pay the least amount for them. That's not an accident. That was a strategic choice they've made. And it's kind of a cat and mouse game they play with pharma. I know that's a bit different, but
that's an interesting way of doing it. I wonder how many patients are that's the currency in healthcare. It's patients and how they're impacted. I wonder if the geography of where you were when you were diagnosed as the deciding factor for whether or not you get to live a little bit longer or not. That's got a sting.
That is, well, yeah, that's, I'm learning more about that. Although an interesting, and I know one of this is going to come digital health. They got this new thing called the JCA, where the pharma companies will go, they make one application for all 27 countries at the same time. And so they make one submission at the EU level, but they have to meet the standard of care in each member state. So that's going to be a big headache. But I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. But I think that's where Europe is going, is trying to homogenize, at least trying to, but I don't want to speculate too much, but that I think is where the puck is going. And it's not just about regulations and stuff like that. It's also about negotiating prices with the big vendors. But
I mean, that goes the other way. So the UK, for example, infamous for never paying full price for any sort of medication ever and negotiating its own little thing, is hit by the other end. So anytime there is a production delay or mishap or anything like that, it's always the first one that they just say, it's like, well, from a business point of view, patients are going to be impacted wherever we stop it. So we're going to be impacted the least if we stop shipping to the UK. This happened quite a few times for particular bladder cancer medications, where admittedly there's only a handful of factories actually making the stuff. And once one of them was out of commission because of, I think, something technical happened over there in France, Britain was the one that was most affected because they just said, well, we're just not going to ship it there. That was even before Brexit. So we can't even blame that for it. But it was just purely because a price point where you're paying the least, patients are going to miss out anyway. If we're not going to discriminate by geography, we're just going to discriminate by who's actually paying full price for it. I think if you go for the single market properly in Europe, it has to be everybody's on the same boat, although that's going to have huge impacts because Europe is not so homogenous and there's huge disparity between the economics in one country or another. Wonder where Greece will end up.
we have a question. Sigrid, can you handle the question in the chat?
On the Q&A or in the chat itself?
Oh, it's in the chat. It's at the very bottom. Look at the very bottom. I'll read it out to you.
Yeah.
I wanted to share a personal reflection after 20 years working on IT projects for healthcare. I've realized that physicians are very appreciative of technological improvements that help them gather more information to support clinical decision-making. However, they are less receptive to systems that seem to interfere or have an opinion on their clinical decisions. Factors such as distrust, lack of understanding of information systems, and fear of losing their jobs play a role in this resistance. It's not really.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's not really a question, but it's a reflection. Yeah. So I once heard someone who finished medical school, and when you finish medical school, like getting handed over, I guess the diploma. It's like, so class, the teacher said, so class, you have to know that you're the creme de la creme of the society. Like you are the top of the top. Like the only, like it's you, the doctor, and then there's God underneath, kind of like you are the best the society can have. And I can imagine, like, if that's, I'm not saying that this is every med school or everyone who has it, but Morkos, you probably you can comment on your experience on that afterwards. But if that is the idea that medical students or doctors get when they're finished, okay, now I know everything because I went to med school, and you hear stories of doctors. Well, I can, just give me this tool, I can build this no skyscraper, or I can build this whatever because I'm a doctor. So they are a bit fed up with that they know a lot, and they do know a lot. They are smart people. Like you have to be smart to go to med school. But I think if you are You've heard that you are the best society can deliver. And now suddenly there's a technology that's not even a person. There's technology that's giving you opinions of how you should do your job. Who are you to say that? Because I went to med school, and then after med school, I even specialized. So it's not just this like 5, 6 years of med school. It's like much longer. And I think that's kind of it, but that's my personal opinion. For like kind of nagging a bit on their ego, because they have been fed this ego. Morkos not fully agreeing to this.
So there's what you're talking about is called the God complex.
Mm-hmm.
And you find it really early on in people who've graduated, particularly the first big stage is straight after graduation.
Yeah, the further you are, the less it is.
You have a big change. You've gone to you could put doctor in front of your name. It's instantly recognizable. Your bank cards change, your driving license change, your passport changes. You're now responsible for people's lives. And then when you start supervising other doctors, so it's the start of your second year is the next big jump. And that's been the same over and over and over, whatever country you go to. So I don't particularly want one country winning that race. However, as things go on, people actually become much, much more humble. And you see it. And then after a while, you just realize that it's kind of like, if you think back to the Dunning-Kruger effect. So I would see the start of second year is probably a peak of Mount Stupid. And you either come down from there or you're going to get washed out because people are going to stop you from doing it. With AI that makes decisions for you or suggests things, you're kind of faced with two problems then. Once you've kind of like come around the other side, you realize that there's a huge amount that you don't know and take it from there. You're either faced with, like Jose said, decisions that are made that you know almost certainly are not right, or even if you suspect they're not, it generates a huge amount of work for you to disprove it. And then everybody's still a little bit suspicious because the first idea of this really top-notch program has actually come up with a suggestion. So now, if something goes wrong, the question is, well, why didn't you follow the computer? The AI told you what to do. And then if you do something and it goes right, there's almost a feeling, well, got away with it that time, didn't you? But at the same time, AI, if you play around enough with Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever, after a certain point, and particularly when they start getting stuck in a loop and things are complicated. So if you have a particularly complex medical practice, it happens a lot quicker. When you start saying it's like, no, talk me through it, and the AI starts talking crap and it's obviously incorrect reasoning, you're still judged by that. So the problem that there is at the moment is AI can make a mistake, act on my behalf, and at the moment there's some Gen AI that will automatically prescribe stuff and order investigations. So ionizing radiation investigations in the UK, you have to have a special medical license, not even a standard medical license, to be able to order the heavy duty ionizing stuff, not x-rays, but heavy duty CT scans and things, radiotherapy, all that stuff. And to have the AI potentially encroach on that when you just think like, but the people who've spent, near enough a decade studying, they are somehow deemed not worthy, but your innovation is. However, if the company says, yes, we can do it, this is better than the average doctor, then the only real way to embed trust is to say, we're going to take responsibility for this action. And that's what I've said to several CEOs when they've said it. If you want to be the final decision maker, no one's fighting for you for that. A lot of the stress in medicine is not the hours, it's the responsibility for people's lives. You make a mistake as a doctor, someone could get really hurt or die. If you want to play in, someone's put it to the CEO, this ended up as a massive Twitter debate, but someone said it to the CEO of a company, shall remain nameless, that if you want to come and play at the adults table, then it's time to put your stake down. You want to come and do this, you can take the responsibility. And if you say to me, I'm going to take responsibility, I'm not going to fight you for it. I will sit there and do the admin for you if you take the responsibility. But the reason doctors are there is because that's someone who's going to make the judgment, going to carry the can when it goes wrong, as well as, be there when it goes right, hopefully. That I've not seen a single tech company from.
I won't do it. And the thing is, it's not just about caring for patients. That doctor probably has $100,000 in debt that they need the salary to pay off. They've basically invested their entire life into that license. They're still paying off the debt, right? And now you're putting me in a position where I either have to do more work unpaid, or I'm risking my license while you prove your concept off my back. And forget everything else. Just think of it from a money point of view, because people have bills to pay as well. They've got $100,000 in debt. They've spent, and they've dedicated their life. They don't have they can't pivot to something else. I think it might be that for that as well.
But if
my off base.
I mean, it probably plays. It depends which healthcare system. So the problem I've veered off that is because paying and which payer. And if you go to a single payer system like NHS, like Scandinavia, like Netherlands, it's very different to if you go to America and you have to bill for every procedure. And at the moment, what is interesting is in America, for example, they've got AI optimizing billing from the doctor side of things and hospital side of things. And then there's a different set of AI models on the insurance companies trying to refuse billing. And it's a arms race at the moment, and who can chuck more development at it. But the end point is going to be responsibility, because if someone's going to make a decision and take responsibility, that's it. If you draw an analogy with a different profession, so if I'm on trial for murder, I haven't killed anyone, before anyone asks, but if I'm on trial for, well, let's pick something smaller than murder, and if I say, don't worry, guys, I've got ChatGPT, this is going to be my representation, everyone will say, are you mental? You've got at least a plea of insanity in the works going on there, haven't you? Whereas for some reason, when the doctor says like, I've got cancer, it's all right, guys. This LLM, I'm sure it's very snazzy, is going to make what chemotherapy decisions there are to make. You just go, are you for real? Is this what you're placing your life in? And it's when you put it in a different framework, suddenly everybody sees it. A lot of founders, like you said, Jose, this is their baby. This is what they desperately want to work. So they won't see the objections as valid in that context. But when you say to them, are you going to trust your legal defense to ChatGPT? They'll say, well, of course not. Are you going to do your accounts entirely on Claude? Probably not. You can. Actually, Claude is not too bad for that. But you still want to double check it. I don't know. It's funny because when you put high stakes into it, people want some other human to make the final call. But for somehow in healthcare, when someone says that just trusting a black box that can't even tell you how it reached this decision by itself, that's seen as, oh my God, no, it's gone all mad. You've gone power hungry. There is, there is a bit of protectiveness to kind of medicine as a whole, but I don't think that that's the drive. It's being asked to carry the responsibility for something that you don't understand, you don't develop, and you have no stake in it. Looking at the markets, for example, the basic principle is if you're going to be asking people to take on extra risk, it has to have extra reward. If that's not the case, even when you're talking about, shares and stocks and equity and debt and all that stuff. If you're not taking on extra risk, you accept lower return. But if I'm now taking on the risk for me and the AI models, and now Epic is, launching another 50 or so that I have to take into account, that sounds like extra risk to me. Medicine's already quite risky. People live and die by this.
I think a friend of mine, he's passed away recently. He said to me, innovation is about managing risk. How's it mitigated? How's it incentivized? I've got a question. Sigrid, do you mind if I ask you a question from the chat? Am I allowed to do that? Do you
Awesome.
mind? This is from, I don't know who this is from. I think this came from the Q&A, and I pasted into the chat. What is your opinion the best product that worked? Do you mind, Sigrid, answering it, and then Morkos answering it? Do you have a favorite?
Tool that worked in the
Best
clinic?
health AI product that worked for medical staff? Is there a love letter health
Still
AI
waiting.
product that you want to shout out to?
Well, I think what you see right now, like you have in radiology, I don't work in radiology, so that's I don't have any favorites there. But in radiology, that's it's been a long field where we have had where AI came in quite early-ish, like much earlier than LLMs. So they have quite some tools that can help, but I am not in that field. I do want to give a shout out to Joachim, who was just here, because I think what they can do and how they can detect high risk patients. That's also why I mentioned to Jose, like, hey, it would be interesting having Joachim here as well, because what they can bring to that process and the whole healthcare process, and especially for emergency rooms, because it's like on and off. Like suddenly they're busy, and then like everyone comes at the same time, and then suddenly there's nothing. And listening or like hearing, because I've talked to Joachim before as well. Like I've heard like numbers that he's mentioned from studies, and so then I'm impressed by that, because I've also gone like through clinical studies on it. So the moment I see an AI tool that's gone through clinical studies, and there are many of those, and that are taking responsibilities, that have gone through MDR. Joachim's company has not, I think, but that's the discussion he's had with the regulators there. But I think when organizations have conversations, not just conversations, but actually take the responsibility and go through MDR, that is also so for people outside of Europe, so medical device regulations are similar to FDA approval, yeah. It's kind of like an approval stamp as well. Like, okay, it is clinically efficient, and it's safer to use than the ones who are not. And that they show that they are serious what they're doing. The moment I talk to companies and organizations that are not ready to go through that route, also, for example, ambient scribes, who say, oh no, but it's the clinicians, they will double check this, and therefore we don't impact clinical decision. I was like, that's bullshit. Use my French, but it's still impacting clinical decision, because you're still is saying what type of information you put into that note, and not whether having to go through regulatory is the best route to kind of get innovation to the market is another discussion. But you want to have tools that have had an approval that you can actually trust if you want it to be used in the market. And yeah, so for me, it's not really one specific tool. I'm looking more at what type of setting do they want that tool, and what are they trying to achieve. So do they have a clear goal, what they're trying to achieve, and can we find tools that are there right now? And honestly, there are quite a lot of work that needs to be done from the innovating side of it as well. And Morkos, what's your take on it?
Ooh, it's hard to have favorites, because at the moment, all the ones I've seen deployed have early iterations, I hope, or I don't think they'll be there in 5 years' time. I think personal opinion is ambient scribes are going to be packaged entirely for free with whatever EHR platform's going. Epic is in the game now and is chucking one in for free. Oracle and Cerner doing the same. So I think that market's been and gone. I am actually working on something myself in terms of AI in healthcare. And I've gone away from frontline healthcare as the source of it. So I've started it's a platform-based solution for the administration side of things. The things that all doctors go to school for, and you spend, best part of a decade doing your medical training, is to look after patients. Like was mentioned here, everybody's somewhat resistant, and for the reasons that we've already gone through, of who's carrying the responsibility, it's very difficult to go down that route, and it's going to hit resistance, which means that you go back to people don't want it. So why are you trying to force it down their throat? I have gone down something that simplifies running a medical practice, running a dental practice. These are things that aren't actually covered in medical school. They're not covered in dental school. They're not covered in nursing school. Everyone just assumes that eventually you'll, by osmosis or magic or something in the water, develop abilities to run this stuff profitably. At the moment, the joke of it is if people really knew how doctors and nurses are rostered and how many spreadsheets are in Excel and the color coding that has no key to it apart from in the head of whoever wrote the spreadsheet in the first place. And that is something that I've seen on multiple continents, multiple systems of practice, multiple specialties, up and down without change, simply because it's a problem that's there and no one can solve it. This is something that AI can do. We know what the numbers are. We know what their names are. We can fit them into it so they don't overlap and they all have their own thing. That's one of the problems. But then at the other end, we also work out how many patients they actually see or how many patients the average doctor can see. So you've now figured out what your capacity will be. I have yet to see a single practice that's beyond a solo where I know how many people I can see that can actually fill that. So that's just one aspect of what the platform is. We've got it to MVP. We've got it to MVP that I can comfortably say is an MVP because the clinicians that have seen it, the managers that have seen it, they all want it as is with no changes added to it, which is something that I've yet to see in any other technical innovation. I'm pretty sure that, once they start using it, the requests for changes will come in. But I think that's part of what we spoke about. We have to be, on the innovation side, open to feedback, open to changes, open to saying, you know what, we tried it, it's not working the way it's supposed to, so we're going to do something different. That's really where it starts and ends. You have to be willing to go where the market is telling you to go, where the gap is rather than where you thought it would be. So that's my favorite, but like Jose said, no one wants to tell you that your baby's ugly. So what about you, Jose? What's your favorite one?
My favorite. I've got multiple clients, so I'm going to get in trouble. And I'm going to say right now, I'm enamored with oncology. Just that field, especially the treatment side. And it's all very early. And obviously, I'm paid to like it. But I like it even when I'm not being paid to like it. And the reason why I like it is I've cared for people. I've been a caregiver twice, people with cancer. I always was afraid of oncologists. I thought they'd be like morticians. They're actually really lovely people. And so it isn't actually so much about the technology itself, it's the spirit of the people who are engaging with it. Does that make sense? I love how they're like, they're traumatized, they're beleaguered, they don't have time. A lot of them, they don't have AI governance boards, but they're kind of venturing out into the Wild West to try new things. And I just love that whole field. Sorry, is that mushy? Am I being mushy? But that's my answer. I hope that makes sense. Does that make sense?
I think you should run it as a poll in the follow-up.
I hate polls.
You could see what, we could see what everybody likes, Ecology is it's an area that impacts a lot more people. But I think it's also an area where you'd be surprised what the technology would be. I've recently found out because my daughter's guinea pig has cancer, and Jesus Christ, the amount of money that's been spent on investigating a guinea pig, that was not a good economic analysis, but healthcare
Well,
isn't necessarily just when you're the payer and you decide, it's not necessarily driven by a cost economics. It's only at that level when you're going it system wide. But yeah.
well, innovation never ends, but the webinar does. And somebody has to go. So we're going to call it. Sigrid, do you want to end the event? Sorry,
Yeah.
everybody. I hope you don't feel like we're kicking you out early, but people have to go. So Sigrid, take it from here.
I just want to say thank you to everyone. Thank you, Morkos, for staying here and sharing your insights and your ideas, how we can collaborate more with clinicians and innovate for the purpose and bringing value to healthcare, whether it is, admin, which you're working on right now, or if you're working more on clinical tools. Also really want to thank Jose, who's been here. Good. He said he was leaving. He's been here the whole time. He's been checking all the questions and all the comments that have come in. And to everyone who's been here, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and for sharing your reflections and asking questions. Really appreciate it. If you have other questions or ideas for future webinars, feel free to also just mention that. Happy to also hear what you would love to have people discuss. So I want to thank everyone and have a good afternoon, evening, wherever you are. I don't think there might be mornings, but who knows, also morning if you're there.
Okay. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.